Good morning. The Ralph P. Schrag Distinguished Teaching Award recognizes a Bethel faculty member who has made an outstanding contribution to teaching. We presented this award at last spring's commencement, affirming the importance that Bethel College places on excellent teaching by faculty and meaningful learning by you, our students. It is an honor now to present to you in Convocation the 2024 Ralph P. Schrag Distinguished Teaching Award winner, Mark Jansen, Professor of History. But before Mark comes, I'd like to share a few brief remarks about Mark. Professor Jansen earned his doctorate from the University of Notre Dame in modern history. He has a master's degree from Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminaries in church history and is a graduate of Bethel College. In addition, Mark attended Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany, studying Protestant theology. Mark is an excellent and a challenging teacher. He pushes his students to higher levels of intellectual achievement in that goal of being excellent and challenging. In addition, he is organized, engaging, and very positive. Whether the size of his class is large or small, his instruction is consistently delivered at an exemplary level. It is evident that Dr. Jansen enjoys teaching and is gifted in that area. His commitment to Mennonite higher education and the church is unquestioned. Not so much my ability to get to my second page. My. I'm going to do it. It worked. I was going to do an anti-pandemic thing and like this. Student comments and course evaluations reflect their perspectives of Professor Jansen's classroom instruction. Here are some quotations. I just really liked how this course was structured. The lectures were interesting, and the way the material was presented was engaging and memorable. Another one. Mark has extremely diverse and intelligent perspectives on all issues in faith. He is able to articulately and effectively communicate not only the content itself, but significant historical and contextual supporting information that makes learning his content significantly easier. Adding his own personal experiences makes the content more relatable and easier to follow. Another one. This is a well put together class that has exponentially increased my knowledge and love of Mennonite history and theology. Mark's teaching style is very helpful in developing a working understanding of this history. And finally, this is my third class with Mark, and I have thoroughly enjoyed every single one. By far, one of the best professors I've ever had. Bethel College is fortunate to have such a distinguished scholar and professor who shares his knowledge on a variety of subject matters while showing his genuine care for all students. We congratulate you, Mark, and welcome you to deliver your address today. Why is Convo even a thing? Let's welcome Professor Mark Jansen.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. Have you ever wondered why we gather at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning in Crable Auditorium? Have you ever thought about that conversation when our founding president, C.H. Wadle, was sitting around with his buddies? They're like, oh, we're going to start a college. I don't know what we're going to do at this college, but whatever we do, the main thing we have to do is get everybody together at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning. What was that conversation like? Is there anything else we could be doing at this hour? Doesn't this seem like kind of weird? Or maybe it's boring? I heard today it was going to be interesting. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll see what happens. I don't know. The problem with calling Convo weird or boring or interesting is that that's not much of a category of analysis. And let me demonstrate what I mean. If you think Convo is weird, there's something way weirder, and that is the fact that there are people out there probably sitting in this auditorium who actually like to eat sweet potatoes, which are disgusting. Sweet potatoes are disgusting. Nobody should ever eat them. And you weirdos out there who think they're part of Thanksgiving dinner have lost your minds. Now, let me ask you this. Have I told you a single thing about sweet potatoes? I haven't told you what they taste like. I haven't told you what they look like. I haven't told you how to cook them. I haven't told you about their cultural background. I haven't told you how sweet potatoes got connected to Thanksgiving. I haven't told you nothing. All you know when I say that sweet potatoes are weird is that I don't like them. So when you say Convo is weird or boring or interesting, you're not actually saying a single thing about Convo. All you're saying is how you feel about Convo, but you're not saying anything about Convo. So how could we get to a more interesting question about Convo and some analysis? And I think there we could sort of ask, well, why did anybody ever think Convo was a good idea? Which I think is an interesting question. Why would anybody ever think this is a good idea? And as it turns out, to answer that question, we have to think about some connections, what might connect Convo to people in the past who thought it was a good idea. And once we're talking about history, we should probably get a historian around, and so maybe a historian can help us think about these things. So that's what we're going to try to do today. Now, before we can talk about the history of connections, we've got to think a little bit about how do connections work at all. So we're going to think about how do connections work, and we all have all kinds of connections in our heads that are not very visible. So we don't really know how are we connected to each other. And that's what we're going to try to illustrate. So first, I'm going to illustrate connections in this room. It's going to be a little interactive, so you might have to be ready to stand up if you are connected to me in this way. So I want you to stand up if you're from Nebraska. I'm from Nebraska. I'm hoping there's somebody else here from Nebraska. All right. Yeah, check it out. There we go. Now, you got to stay standing because we're connected. Now, here's the connection. Back in January, when the top temperature, the high temperature on Temperature Tuesday was 0, and if we heard about that, so we're thinking, man, why is it so dang far to get a Runza? I want my free Runza. All right, now you can sit down. So there's a connection. You have no idea what we're talking about. So there's a connection between Nebraskans. We all know what's going on. The rest of you have no idea what's going on. Here's another set of connections. So let's see. If you are now or ever have been a member of a football team like me, I need you to stand up. So where are my football players? You all need to be standing up. Football players, got some old football players. We got some younger football players. We got all kinds of football players. That's great. And football players are connected because we can talk about what position did you play. We can talk about that game you played in the snowstorm. We can talk about playing football in the rain. You can talk about a coach who taught you a lesson you won't forget for the rest of your life. Think about that coach. So we have got connections as football players that non-football players might not have. All right. Well, if we now ask the question, we're going to take the connection that we actually all have, could make you all stand up, but I won't, is the connection we all have is why are we in Convo? And the question is, why did anybody ever think, when's the first time somebody thought it would be a good idea to get a whole group of people together and tie that to education? And the answer to that question is we have to go all the way back 2,500 years ago to ancient Greece. And when historians tell you they're going to ancient Greece, what they actually mean is that they're going to Athens. And where we're actually going is to this place here. It's called the Nix. And you can see off in the distance, this is the Acropolis, that's the temple district. So we're close to the heart of ancient Athens. And in ancient Athens, it's a democracy. It's a direct democracy. And they would gather citizens, so basically male property owners, had the right to vote. 50,000 people. You want to decide something, you get them all together. The quorum was 6,000 people to decide, are we going to go to war with Sparta Are we going to execute these traitors to our state? Are we going to ostracize, ban forever this one person who's been causing us trouble? Major decisions. What's the tax rate going to be? Who's not going to have to pay taxes? Get 6,000 people together, hold speeches, and make decisions. If you want to be anybody in Athens ever, you have to learn how to stand up and speak articulately in front of a group of people. So if you're a father and you want your son to be anybody, you're going to take him along to the assembly, to the ecclesia, and he's going to watch. How's the speaker doing? What did he do well? What did he do poorly? Education through watching others speak. That was their idea. And it raises the question, so if you want your son to be a leader, what kind of education do you need for leadership? So first you got to be interested in leadership, and now we're going to ask people to stand up again. I want you to stand up if you think you might ever be a leader of any kind. If you're going to be a teacher, you need to stand up because teachers lead classrooms. If you're going to be a nurse, you need to stand up because nurses will lead care teams. If you're going to be an employee in a business that supervises, do you think you'll ever supervise an employee in your life? You need to stand up because you are a leader. If you think you're going to be a coach, you need to be standing up because coaches are leaders. So those of you people still sitting down, you're never going to supervise anybody. You'll just be working by yourself. That's interesting. Well, we still got a pretty good group of leaders here. That's great. Look at those leaders. Now, what kind of education do we need for leaders? Thank you. You can sit down. We're going to figure that out. So the ancient Greeks thought about this a lot because they were trying to educate leaders. And here's their answer. What you need is the trivium, first of all. And the trivium is these three subject areas. We're going to study grammar. How does language work? We're going to study dialectics. That's sort of weighing the pros and cons. You might call it critical thinking. You might call it logic. And then you need rhetoric to persuade people. So leaders have to speak effectively. They have to get people all moving in the same direction. That's real leadership that gets things done effectively. The alternative is coercion or violence, not very effective. So the Greeks, they're democratic. They're like, let's learn how to talk. Once you've learned how to talk like an educated person, the next thing you need is a quadrivium. It's the next set of subjects you're going to learn. And you'll look at this and you're like, how on earth do these fit together? This is bizarre. You need arithmetic because you have to count what you have, figure out and be organized. You need arithmetic. Astronomy, if you think about it, that connects you to the natural world. How do the stars work? How does our world work? We are connecting to the natural world through astronomy. Music for the ancient Greeks was a way to get in touch with your emotions and to organize your internal space. How do I organize my own soul? Music is what will teach you how to do that. And finally, geometry will allow you to build things and position things so they don't fall apart, which is really useful. So if you put all 7 of these things together, what you have is a unified vision of reality. You can put everything together by yourself as an independent thinker. You're not dependent on somebody to tell you what to think. You can participate in conversations and debates, thinking on your own, standing on your own. And if you're asked, for example, to build a temple, you can pull it all together. You've got the arithmetic to count the blocks you need. You've got the astronomy to position the temple so it matches the stars in the natural world. You have the music to think about the hymns you're going to sing and the praises to your gods. How you're going to do aesthetics to organize the temple, to organize your interior space in worship. And you got geometry so you can build your temple so it doesn't fall down on your head. You put this all together, and you have the 7 liberalis arts, the 7 liberal arts. Liberal in the sense of generous, noble. Somebody gives liberally, that's what we're talking about here. Somebody is free, independent. That's what liberal means, the liberal arts. And the ars, it's like arts or crafts. It's like an artisan. You have to practice it. You can't do this without a lot of work. So the liberal arts are practices and crafts of your mind to create independent thinkers who will be leaders and contribute to the good of society. That's how education for leadership works for the ancient Greeks. Now, Athens is really small. How does it get from Athens to us? And you have to go to the gymnasium to figure this out. So the Greeks, this is a couple hundred years after Athens. This guy named Alexander III conquers all this territory, including the Middle East, and that later becomes part of the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire gets transmitted to us. So that's kind of how we get the liberal arts. But in this huge empire that's ruled by the Greeks, they set up educational institutions called a gymnasium. And at a gymnasium, you would gather young men and train them. They're mostly training them for war, so they have to be good athletes. So they're doing track and field events, they're doing wrestling, that kind of thing. And they're doing their training naked. So the Greek word for naked is gymnos. That's why we have a gymnasium. So if we wanted to do, and then they once that's where the young people are, then the sophists show up. The sophists are the teachers of the liberal arts. Sophia is Greek for wisdom. So the teachers of wisdom, the teachers of the liberal arts, they show up where the naked guys are doing their training. So I would propose that for our next convo, maybe when the weather's nice, we should go to Thresher Stadium. We've done convo there before. We should all be naked, and that will be convo. So I'm going to try that out, see how that works. That will be authentic Greek education. Well, you get another 300-400 years down the row, and you get this guy and a new kind of way to think about education. Paul of Tarsus, of course, is an apostle of Jesus Christ, a founder of many congregations in the early church. And if you ask him how to think about what it means to be a thinking person, he might say this: test everything, hold fast to what is good, abstain from every form of evil. This is actually the motto of Convo for us now. So you'll notice here, it's still test everything, critical thinking. How does that work? But what you're working towards is holding fast to what is good and abstaining from evil. That's not really categories in the classical liberal arts. So something has shifted here. And as you know, for Paul, the good is Jesus Christ. So that is what we're now educating for if we ask Paul. Your thinking should be about Jesus Christ. Well, if you go 500 years after Paul, the Roman Empire has disappeared, education's disappeared, literacy has disappeared. Nobody's thinking or writing about anything except for a very small group of people. One of them is a man named Benedict, who gathers young men again in a community where they're going to learn about Jesus. They're going to spend most of their time praying, reciting the Psalms, and they have a rule for their life that some of you know because you would have read it in my class. And the whole point of living together now and learning is to establish a school for the Lord's service. Education is for serving the Lord. You'll notice there's no mention of the liberal arts here. So the liberal arts have disappeared. I don't know how we get leadership without the liberal arts, but it's disappeared here. Well, if you go another ways down, another 800 years or so, you get to this guy, Petrarch. He's an Italian, and at this point, the church is really a mess. The Roman Empire has disappeared. The Catholic Church is running things. And it has a lot of problems. And Petrarch says the church is impossible. Lots of corruption. Politicians are impossible. We can't put up with them. We need something else. So he focuses on human ability and wants to go back to the classical education of the liberal arts. That would be a better system than what we have. So we've asked Petrarch to do some writing for us because he's bringing back the liberal arts, and this is what he wrote. See if you recognize this. This is the first learning objective for Convo. And you can see that we're going to learn in a community of learners, just like it's like going back to the gymnasium. And we're going to be exposed to the social and natural world. We've got astronomy back in here, maybe music, other academic disciplines, and we're going to think critically. We've got dialectics back in here. The liberal arts have come back. Patriarch brought them back, and he wrote them in your Convo learning objectives. You'll notice Paul's kind of fallen away here. About all that's left of Paul is exploring basic value issues. So we kind of threw out did we throw out the Christian stuff and brought back the Greeks? Well, that's the connection to the Convo learning objectives. Now, there's another guy, he's in like 150 years later than Patriarch. He's also a humanist. He's like, let's really think about human capabilities. But he thinks Patriarch's all wrong. Those learning objectives that somebody wrote in your Convo syllabus are a bunch of hooey. It's not how people really work. You know what Patriarch said? He said when students come to Convo, they'll have one thing in their mind. Students will come to Convo and say, I just want to learn. I just want to learn. I want to learn how the world works. I want to learn how I work. That's what students will say. That's what Patriarch said. Machiavelli, he's coming a little later. He's writing also about leadership. And he writes a book, The Prince. If you ever want to be the prince, here's how to do it. This is like his template, how to be a leader. He says the only thing that motivates people, the main thing that motivates people, is self-interest. People don't care about anything else but themselves. They're motivated by self-interest. And the top motivator of self-interest is fear. Machiavelli says to get people to do what they're supposed to, you have to make them fearful. So we asked Machiavelli to write a little portion of our Convo syllabus. This is what he came up with. All right, listen up. If you don't pay attention, you will be punished, and your punishment is you're going to pay us more money. You paying attention? If you don't, more money. And we know when students come in here that they can't be trusted. So we're going to have people watching you because you can't be trusted. You need to be fearful of the consequences. And we know you're going to be disrespectful. You can look around the room. See, is there anybody being disrespectful? You can count on it. Students are going to be disrespectful. They're going to get up early. They're going to disrespect the speaker. That's how students are going to be. That's how people are. Cannot trust them. You got to instill fear in them. You can just look around Convo, and you can see Patriarch and Machiavelli are arguing with each other every day in Convo. Who is right? Students just come and they want to learn, or students just come and they're completely self-interested? Which is it? No. Let's keep going, see what happens next. So we had, all of this was happening under Catholicism, and then we get the Protestant Reformation, and we get Luther comes onto the scene, and Luther is really skeptical of the way education has been done, because those universities moved out of the monasteries. And this is what Luther thinks about Catholic education. He was a professor himself at the university, and this is what he says about universities. He says, "What else are universities than places for training youth in Greek glory, in which loose living prevails, the Holy Scriptures and the Christian faith are little taught, and the blind heathen master Aristotle rules alone even more than Christ?" Does that sound like Bethel? Does loose living prevail? I have no idea. Well, the Protestants want to do this different. So they get their first Protestant university in Leiden in the Netherlands. By the 1640s, it's grown to be the largest Protestant university in the world, had 500 students. Could you imagine going to such a giant university? 500 students, the largest Protestant university in the world. And they are focusing on religious formation. Faith formation is at the center of what this college is going to do. But they still want to train people for leadership, so they need the liberal arts. But the liberal arts are pagan. How can we protect students from the pagan liberal arts? And the answer is required chapel. If you're in chapel every day thinking about God, that will protect you from the paganism embedded in the liberal arts. So we're going to have required chapel every day. That's the Protestant model. Now, when you require people to go to chapel or to church, they'll fall asleep. And so this is the next innovation I would propose. This might be an employment experience job. Get a tithing man. They did this in Dutch Reformed churches. They did this in the villages in New England. The tithing man will come in. He's got a stick with a little bulb on one end. If somebody's sleeping, the tithing man will bonk him on the head. If it's a guy, bonk the guys on the head who are sleeping and not paying attention. Somebody just be walking up and down the aisles. You can't bonk women on the head. That's not polite. So they have a feather. You tickle their nose. So you're going to have a tithing man to get this place to pay more attention. That'd be great. You bring this all to the United States. Harvard University, the first university founded here, just 16 years after the Puritans arrived, so they're really focused on education. This is the oldest building that's still there. And they have required chapel services for, now you know why, to keep us safe from the paganism of the liberal arts, to keep us focused on our faith. But after the American Revolution, the chapel services have to become more generic. They can't focus on a single group because of religious freedom. So chapel becomes a little more vague, and by the time you get to 1900, chapels which had been common, required chapel services, had been common even at state schools. They're starting to fade. There's a lot more subjects to learn, all these new disciplines, chemistry, biology, sociology, psychology, all this to add, and it all just fritters away. There's no center left to education. The Greeks had a unified vision of reality. American higher ed has none. What can we do? What can we do? In the 1930s at Columbia University, they introduced a history of civilization as a kind of a new center for education. We'll all know what we came from. We all know the civilization that produced us. By the 1950s, they're talking about general education classes. Everybody should have kind of the same set of courses. Maybe that will be the new center of our education. And by the 1980s, they're talking about a core education. Should be some core courses. So if you look at this and you think about what Bethel does, you can see that Bethel has borrowed a lot from what's been going on in North American higher ed. So let's talk about dear old Bethel. Got founded in 1887. There's a very nice building. There's no trees back in the day. And of course, Bethel has required chapel every day because this is how education is done and this is what keeps us all safe. You get to 1932 and you find the administration is talking with students and so on, and they report that students are saying that chapel is monotonous. And the administration also notes that they're having problems with chapel absences among certain types of students. Do we still have those type of students here? I don't know. But this changes in the 1960s. So there's a lot of ferment here. You can see chapel was required 3 days a week by 1967 in the course catalog. 1968, chapel and convo are required. They didn't change a thing, they just added it. This is the first time convocation gets named. So it should have just been chapel, but now they're calling it convocation. 1969, now they just call it convocation and they've dropped chapel. But they're probably doing some of both. Probably some sessions are like these and some are more worship, and it's all mixed together. Students are really cranky at Bethel. They're burning their cards that they have to turn in at Convo. We refuse to go to chapel if it's required. That's not the Anabaptist way. And so in 1970, chapel becomes voluntary as it remains today, and Convo on Monday and Friday becomes required. And just recently, as you know, it was dropped on Friday. So now you know how Bethel got here. And this gives us a chance to think about Convo beyond just calling it weird. As you know, Patriarch wrote our learning objectives, and he's telling us, what are we doing in Convo? Why are we here? It's about education, and it's about community. Those are the two things we're doing. Patriarch has laid this out for us, 700 years ago. So when we think about the education, let's just review the educational models that are options for us. These might be in your head today. Let's see if any of them are. The first model, of course, is the classical liberal arts. I'm here to learn how to speak, how to integrate to the world, how to become a leader. That is why I am here. So you might come with that in your mind. Another thing you might be thinking about is Christian formation. I'm really curious how I could tie a Christian faith into an academic discipline, into the social world, into anything around me. How can I tie faith and learning together? That's a model that you might adopt, and you'll certainly see some of that in Convo. And now you know why it's there. Another educational model, this would be more recent. This is probably a kind of a 20th century model. And those of you in vocation seminar know that this has two meanings. So you could take vocation as connected to faith formation. I'm going to take my faith and develop a meaningful life of work and service. How can education and faith develop meaning for me over my life? The other meaning of vocation is, I'm just here to get job training. I just want somebody to tell me how to get a job and training. So that could be an option. I think a fourth educational model is transactional. This has been around really forever. People were paying money for education. And you might say, okay, I'm paying Bethel money. I should get something out of it. I'm paying Bethel money. They should teach me how to solve some immediate problem. I'm paying Bethel money. They should allow me to continue activity that I enjoy. I really enjoyed music, so I'm going to pay Bethel money and they'll let me continue music. I really enjoyed soccer. I'm going to pay Bethel money and they're going to let me continue soccer. I really enjoyed art. I'm going to pay Bethel money and they're going to help me do art. You're just paying for a particular activity. And that might be the educational model you have in your head. To me, I've been interested in this. So last semester, I surveyed all the students that I had in classes and asked them questions about Convo. And for students who wrote down their educational model was transactional, they had high dissatisfaction with Convo. But if students wrote down anything from any of these other, the first three educational models, then they had at least ambivalent feelings about Convo. So now we could say, well, with this particular educational model, Convo works really well. It's designed, as you can tell, to fit the first three educational models. But if you have the fourth educational model, Convo wasn't really designed to meet that need. So that might give us a different set of tools and language to talk about Convo with. Now, the other issue, that's the educational side. Now we got to talk about the community side. And people will tell me, look, the problem with Convo is that the content's just not very good. Some of them are just poorly done, they're poorly organized, they're obscure, the speaker doesn't know the audience, they have no idea who they're talking to. Convo's problem is it's a crappy product. And you cannot rally a community around a crappy product. Community's just not going to show up to watch crap. Is that true? No community will ever show up to watch crap. Memorial Stadium, Lincoln, Nebraska. We are beating Wisconsin. Nebraska football has produced a crappy product since before most of you were born. That's a community of 85,000 people who have gathered in a sold-out stadium since before I was born. Community is about commitment. It's not about the product. So every day you're asking, every convo, you're asking yourself, and we can just see, what community are you committed to? So communities are built around commitment, and God, we hope they fix their crappy product, but we're still going to show up if they do or not. So, well, now you know that every Monday Every Monday is Judgment Day. Every Monday you come to Convo and you're judging the Convo speaker, the Convo presentation. Did they do a good job? Does it make sense? Does it not? But every Monday, Convo is judging you. This form of education has been happening to develop leaders for 2,500 years. Where do you fit? How do you measure up? Convo is judging you, and you're judging Convo, as you should. Every day, every Monday, you should judge Convo. What worked well, what did not, and why. So Monday is also Opportunity Day. If you can flip in one of those first three educational models, you'll have opportunities to learn. Speaker's doing a great job. Here's what worked well. That person doesn't know even basic grammar. You have an opportunity to learn something every Monday. And finally, every Monday is a decision day. You have to decide how you're going to approach education. You have to decide how you're going to approach your community. You have to decide what it is you want out of life and what you want out of your education at Bethel. So now you know why Convo is a thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Our first question, I think, is Lucy Bowler back in the back corner up there.
Okay. So my question for you today is, do you feel like we are moving past a point in our capitalistic society that students can work to prioritize any view of college other than a transactional view?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of this is individual. So there have been students generations ago who faced a lot of economic pressure to even study and made a choice and found a way to do that. And so I think students today still have that capacity. It's a choice you make. At the same time, of course, the structure of our society makes choices easier or harder for people. So it's all a kind of it's up to us, but it's also up to us to think about our community and what the opportunities are for people. But absolutely, students can still choose to find a way in their educational model linked to Christian formation or liberal arts that Convo makes a lot of sense. It's a choice, in my opinion.
If the mic could make its way to JT here under the clock.
Yo. Okay. So with the idea of test everything mentioned from Paul, challenging the students on ideas and keeping what is good and then staying away from what is bad, if the founding president and his friends were to see Convocation now, do you think they'd be content with how far it's come, and does it stay true to that?
Well, if you'd ask C.H. Wadle, he'd say, why are you guys not in chapel every day? That's what C.H. Wadle would see. So, we've clearly gotten a long ways away from a tighter focus on faith formation, which is where Bethel started. And that, frankly, has pros and cons, right? So there's been good reasons we've done that. And you saw, Harvard, everybody's done this. So part of it is the culture that we live in. There's so much more to study. There's so much more to learn. There's so much pressure from the outside to match expectations of how an education works so you could get a job. Back when C.H. Wadle was teaching people, you didn't need much to get teacher certification. They didn't have a nursing program. They didn't do athletics. So we've added a lot of things that are really good, but it's made that process much more complicated. I still think C.H. Wadle would say you guys really could do more about chapel and figuring out a way to follow Jesus. But we have a much more diverse student body than we used to have, and that's also really good. So to me, these are challenges that C.H. Wadle never faced. And I don't know what the answer is, but they're kind of up to the community. They're up to the decisions that we make every day. Everybody can go to chapel on Wednesday, but not very many people do. And there might be other ways to work at faith formation, of course. So that's a great question, though, to think about.
Looks like Emil has a question.
I'm assuming that as you've been at Bethel for a while and also as a professor of history, some of this information maybe wasn't super new to you, but I'm curious, in your research for this, like what was new to you, if that makes sense?
Oh, yeah. Because I was in those seats when I was a student. I've attended Convo for decades now as a faculty member. I think about Convo a lot. And pieces of this, of course, students in History of Civ have heard. What was new for me was to try to figure out how to pull it all together. So I hadn't really thought about how to connect things until I connected them. I also was not clear on the history and the transition of chapel and convo in the 60s at Bethel. So I had to go do a little bit of research on that, and that was kind of interesting what happened in the 60s. There was really stuff going on that students were so rambunctious. But I'd say for me personally, the main thing I got out of this was a kind of a long 2,500 year trend to think about how liberal arts are so influential and how they disappear and how they come back. And as a historian, I just love to think about those things, and I think they're really important. For me, they're very helpful to figure out our world. Like, ask anybody, what the heck are we doing in Convo? It's a bizarre question. But you bring in the history, and it starts to make sense what people were thinking when they got this going. So, yeah.
Another question? Coming up, right around March 7th or so, Peter and I are hosting a Convo conversation about what you all would want out of Convo. What are topics that you would like explored? The schedule for this spring has kind of been set, but if there are things you want Convo to explore next year, email us, send somebody to that meeting in order to tell us what you're interested in. There are a lot of different ways to get us that information. Thank you for listening attentively. While I'm talking, you can stay seated. It's okay. While I'm talking, Convo assistants, why don't you get the scanners prepared and come down to the front. And next Monday, we will be back in this space fully clothed. So, yeah, sorry to destroy Mark's vision there, but. Okay. Convo scanners, please come to the front and you can begin to dismiss everyone.